The universe was suffocating in its own immortality. 3 weeks after the Genesis field had isolated death within Earth's solar system, galactic civilization was discovering that existence without endings was not paradise. It was the cruelest form of hell imaginable. Stars burned past their natural lifespans, becoming bloated monstrosities that should have collapsed into beautiful supernovas, but instead hung in space like cosmic tumors. Civilizations that had achieved their cultural peaks found themselves unable to conclude their stories. Trapped in endless repetition of the same achievements, High Counselor Velthara stood alone in her crystalline chamber, watching reports flood in from across the galaxy. The Eternal Collective's uploaded consciousnesses were fragmenting from lack of meaningful conclusion. The Nexus builders had stopped creating entirely, their immortal existence stretching into purposeless infinity. Even her own species was beginning to crack under the weight of existence, without the possibility of completion. Status of the Genesis field? She asked the empty room, her advisors having fled when the cosmic implications became clear. Stable and impenetrable, came the automated response. The isolated pocket universe continues to contain the anomalous entity. However, universal entropy levels are approaching critical stagnation thresholds. She had succeeded in containing death, but in doing so, had removed the fundamental force that made life meaningful. The cure had become worse than the disease. Inside the Genesis pocket universe, Dmitri was having quite a pleasant time. Dr. Patel had convinced him to restore something resembling normal physics to their isolated space, and Prague was functioning much as it always had, except that death, when it came, was now a thing of perfect timing and beautiful completion, rather than random biological failure. Mrs. Novikova had passed away the previous Tuesday, but not before completing the novel she had been writing in secret for 40 years, and seeing her granddaughter graduate from university with honors. Her final moment had been spent sitting in her garden, watching sunset paint the sky in colors that seemed more vivid, because she knew it was her last time seeing them. She was ready, Dmitri had explained to Dr. Patel, who had attended the funeral, a ceremony that somehow managed to be both heartbreaking and transcendently beautiful. Her story was complete. Allowing her to continue past that point would have diminished the perfection of what she had accomplished. But even in their paradise of proper endings, Dmitri could feel the universe outside their bubble growing sick with stagnation. He sat in his garden, stroking one of his cats, a tabby named Pushkin who had lived for exactly as long as his particular feline story required, and considered options. You could break the field, Dr. Patel suggested. Force your way back into normal space and restore the natural cycles. I could, Dmitri agreed, but that would be destructive. The Genesis field is quite robust. Breaking it would likely sterilize several star systems and eliminate whatever remains of the Galactic Council. While poetic, that seems excessive. So what's the alternative? Dmitri smiled, the expression somehow carrying both the kindness of an elderly professor and the vast patience of cosmic forces. They have to ask nicely. The crisis outside the Genesis field was reaching critical mass. Civilizations that had existed for millions of years were beginning to collapse not from external threats, but from the sheer meaninglessness of existence without natural conclusion. Art had become impossible because nothing could be completed. Love had lost its urgency because nothing was precious enough to lose. Achievement had become hollow because no accomplishment could serve as a satisfying climax to effort. Commander Vexhai, still trapped outside Earth's solar system with his enlightened fleet, sent a message toward the Genesis field knowing it would never penetrate the barrier. To the entity we mistakenly attacked, we understand now. We need you. The galaxy needs you. Please teach us how to make peace. Similar messages began arriving from across galactic civilization. The Void Singers transmitted haunting melodies that conveyed profound apology. The crystalline hierarchies created artworks that somehow expressed regret in geometric form. Even species that had never acknowledged death's existence began sending prayers, pleas, and offerings toward the isolated pocket universe that contained the force they had tried to destroy. High Counselor Velthara, alone with the weight of her civilization's greatest mistake, finally understood what she had to do. She opened a direct communication channel toward the Genesis field, knowing her words would not penetrate the barrier but needing to speak them anyway. To Death himself, she said, her crystalline voice carrying across empty space. I am Velthara of the Galactic Council. We were wrong. We attacked you out of fear and ignorance. We have created a universe without endings, and it is horrific. Please, if you can hear this, we ask for your forgiveness. We ask for your return. We ask you to teach us what the humans already know, how to make mortality beautiful instead of terrible. Inside the Genesis field, Dimitri felt the apology arrive not as sound waves but as a fundamental shift in cosmic intention. The Galactic Council, after centuries of fearing death, was finally ready to learn from it. They're asking nicely, he told Dr. Patel with satisfaction. The dissolution of the Genesis field was not the violent explosion the Council had feared, but something far more elegant. Dimitri simply stepped through the barrier between artificial and normal space-time, bringing with him the gentle inevitability that made existence meaningful. The return of death to normal space was felt instantly across the galaxy. Stars that had been burning past their time finally achieved their magnificent supernovas, seeding space with heavy elements that would form new worlds. Civilizations that had been trapped in eternal stagnation found themselves capable of completion, transcendence, and the profound satisfaction of stories well told. But death's return came with conditions. Across every communication channel in the galaxy, Dimitri's voice spoke with the authority of cosmic law itself. I accept your apology, but change must be real, not just desperate. Every species will now experience mortality as humans do, not as random failure but as natural completion. You will learn to see endings as beautiful rather than tragic, and you will never again mistake the force that gives existence meaning for something to be conquered. The transformation was immediate and profound. Species that had lived for millennia in sterile immortality found themselves aging, but aging toward moments of perfect completion rather than decay. Technologies designed to preserve consciousness indefinitely began evolving toward helping beings craft beautiful final chapters instead of avoiding endings entirely. The Galactic Council itself was restructured. Around the principle of term limits, no being could hold power indefinitely, because power without the possibility of ending inevitably became corruption. Velthara, her crystalline form now showing the beautiful imperfections that came with accepting finite existence, became the first council leader to voluntarily step down, spending her remaining years creating art that captured the bittersweet beauty of temporary existence. And in Prague, Dmitri Volkov returned to his cottage to find his garden exactly as he had left it. His cats were waiting for him, his tomatoes needed watering, and Mrs. Novakova's granddaughter had left a note asking if he would like to adopt the elderly woman's remaining plants. Dr. Patel stayed for tea before returning to her own transformed life. Will you remain, Dmitri Volkov? She asked. For a while, he said, settling into his familiar wooden chair with Pushkin purring on his lap. I've grown quite fond of this identity. Besides, humanity still has much to teach me about making mortality beautiful, and I suspect the galaxy will need regular reminders about the lessons they've learned. The news reported unusual aurora, displays across Earth's sky as the galaxy's civilizations sent thank you messages in the form of converted weapons platforms creating art instead of destruction. Children asked their parents why the grown-ups seemed so happy lately, and the adults found themselves giving surprisingly wise answers about the preciousness of temporary things. Commander Vexhai, his warship now permanently converted into a mobile art installation, established a new patrol route that brought messages of gratitude and beautiful endings to species across the galaxy. His crew, forever changed by their encounter with cosmic truth, became ambassadors of the human understanding that had saved universal civilization. And in his garden in Prague, Death tended his tomatoes and fed his cats and read books that told stories with proper beginnings, middles, and satisfying conclusions. He had revealed himself to save the galaxy, but in the end, he had returned to the quiet life that had made him so fond of humanity in the first place. The universe was mortal again, and therefore beautiful. Everything was exactly as it should be. The galaxy was dying, not in the violent, destructive sense the Galactic Council had feared, but in the most beautiful way imaginable. Death, fully manifest and no longer constrained by his careful disguise as Dmitri Volkov, was teaching the universe how to embrace endings properly. Civilizations that had existed in sterile immortality for millions of years suddenly rediscovered the concept of completion. The Nexus builders, who had spent eons constructing machines to maintain their consciousness indefinitely, began creating monuments instead, permanent structures that would outlast their creators and tell their stories to whatever came after. On Velthara's homeworld, the crystalline beings who had never known death because they simply regrew from fragments when damaged, spontaneously developed the concept of final form. They began choosing moments of perfect beauty or achievement to crystallize permanently, their life essence creating artworks that would endure while their consciousness moved on to whatever lay beyond existence. The wave of change was spreading at faster than light speeds, carried not by technology, but by the fundamental restructuring of what it meant to be alive in a universe where death had revealed himself. Status report, Velthara demanded, but her remaining advisors could only offer increasingly impossible observations. High Counselor, Intelligence Director Kazakthi reported, his serpentine form now flickering between solid matter and something more conceptual. We're receiving reports from across the galaxy. Species are voluntarily concluding their civilizations, not through destruction, but through completion. Explain. The Void Singers, who we thought we'd eliminated with the Omega Protocol centuries ago, they've returned, but they're not trying to unweave reality anymore. They're composing what they call the final song, a musical piece that will tell the story of everything that ever was before bringing it to a beautiful conclusion. Dr. Patel, still watching from the cottage window as cosmic forces reshaped local reality, felt the change in ways her scientific training couldn't quite process. She was simultaneously standing in a simple garden in Prague and floating in the space between galaxies where death conducted the symphony of existence. You're not just revealing yourself, she said to the entity who had been her neighbor's quiet professor. You're teaching the entire galaxy what humans always understood. Humans, Dmitri replied, his voice now carrying the harmony of stellar collapse and the rhythm of planetary formation, are the only species that learn to make peace with endings. Every other civilization sees death as failure, as something to be overcome. You alone understood that mortality is what makes existence precious. Around them, the garden had become something that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Prague continued to function normally. Mrs. Novikova was hanging laundry on her line, completely unaware that her neighbor was reshaping cosmic understanding. But overlaid on this mundane reality was something far grander. The approaching Council Armada was experiencing what their instruments could only describe as aggressive enlightenment. Ships that had been built for conquest found their crews spontaneously developing art, poetry, and philosophical understanding that made violence seem impossibly crude. Weapons designed to destroy worlds were being converted into instruments for creating music that could be heard across interstellar space. Commander Vexhai, his consciousness now expanded by direct contact with cosmic truth, stood on his bridge watching his crew voluntarily decommission their warship's weapon systems. We came here to eliminate a threat, he announced to his bridge crew, but we've discovered something more valuable than conquest, the wisdom to know when stories should end. His weapons officer, tears of crystalline joy streaming down her face, was programming their quantum disruption lance to paint aurora displays across Earth's sky instead of searing holes in its surface. Sir, with your permission, I'd like to spend our remaining operational time creating something beautiful instead of destroying something precious. Permission granted, Vexhai replied, feeling the weight of centuries of meaningless violence lift from his consciousness. All ships, new mission parameters. Transform our instruments of destruction into tools of creation. Let's show this remarkable species what we can accomplish when we're not trying to eliminate everything that challenges our assumptions. But High Counselor Velthara, watching her galactic order dissolve into spontaneous art and philosophy, made one final desperate decision. If she couldn't destroy death, perhaps she could contain him. Activate the Genesis Protocol, she commanded, her crystalline form pulsing with desperate energy. The Genesis Protocol was the Council's most carefully guarded secret, a device that could create pocket universes, completely separate from normal space-time. The plan was to trap Earth's entire solar system in an artificial reality where death's influence could be isolated. The massive apparatus, hidden in the galactic core for precisely such emergencies, began powering up. It would create a bubble of artificial space-time around Earth, sealing death away from the rest of the galaxy while preserving the cosmic order that had existed before humans appeared. Dmitri felt the Genesis device activating like someone attempting to build walls around the concept of mathematics. It was theoretically possible. Even death could be contained if the container existed outside the universe he helped define. But the cost would be enormous. They're trying to imprison you, Dr. Patel realized, feeling the cosmic disturbance as reality itself began to bend around their solar system. Yes, Dmitri said calmly, but they don't understand what that would actually accomplish. The Genesis field began to form around Earth's solar system, a bubble of artificial reality designed to cut them off from the normal universe. But as it solidified, something unexpected happened. Instead of containing death's influence, it began to amplify it. Because death wasn't something that could be separated from existence, he was the fundamental principle that defined existence's boundaries. Trying to contain him was like trying to contain the concept of shape itself. The Genesis field, designed to create a pocket universe, instead created a space where death's true nature could manifest without any constraints whatsoever. The pocket universe became a realm where endings were visible, tangible, beautiful things. Every star in their isolated solar system began to sing its own mortality song. Every planet danced through cosmic time, showing its birth, evolution, and eventual return to cosmic dust in eternal cycles that were breathtakingly gorgeous. Earth itself became a living demonstration of how mortality could create meaning instead of destroying it. Every human life story became visible as streams of light that showed the beautiful arc from birth to death, the choices and relationships and moments of growth that gave each existence its unique shape. "It's magnificent," Dr. Patel whispered, seeing her own life story written in starlight, understanding for the first time how every decision and relationship had contributed to the elegant narrative of her existence. But outside the Genesis field, the unintended consequences were spreading faster than the Council could comprehend. Cutting death off from the normal universe meant that normal endings had become impossible. Stars that should have died continued burning, creating impossible radiation cascades. Civilizations that had been ready to conclude their stories found themselves trapped in eternal stagnation. The beautiful cycle of creation and destruction that drove cosmic evolution ground to a halt. High Counselor, Kazakthi reported with growing panic. "The Genesis field is working too well. We've isolated the human system, but we've also isolated the force of entropy itself. The universe is beginning to stagnate." Velthara watched displays showing galaxies where stellar evolution had simply stopped, where civilizations that had been ready to achieve transcendence through completion were trapped in endless, meaningless existence. How long until critical failure? Unknown. Without the natural cycles of ending and renewal, universal entropy may reverse. We could be looking at eternal stagnation instead of natural cosmic evolution. In the Genesis pocket universe, Dmitri was learning to exist without constraints for the first time in billions of years. The artificial reality allowed him to be fully himself, without worrying about accidentally unmaking solar systems or causing premature universal heat death. It was, he realized, quite liberating. "They meant to imprison me," he told Dr. Patel, "but they've actually created the first space where I can be completely honest about what I am, without needing to hold back for fear of damaging normal reality." Around them, the pocket universe was becoming a paradise of beautiful endings. Human lives were extending not through artificial preservation, but through perfect timing. People lived exactly as long as their personal stories needed to achieve completion, dying at moments of perfect narrative satisfaction, rather than random biological failure. But outside their isolated bubble, the galaxy was learning why death was not a destroyer, but a necessity. Without endings, there could be no new beginnings. Without mortality, existence became static and meaningless. The Galactic Council was about to discover that they had created a crisis that could only be resolved by apologizing to the cosmic force they had tried to contain, and Dmitri was preparing to teach them exactly how to ask death for forgiveness. The Omega device fired. For 0.0003 seconds, the weapon functioned exactly as designed. Reality unweaving energies raced toward Earth at speeds that transcended light, time, and causality itself. The beam was designed to reach backward through the timeline and ensure that Earth had never formed, that humanity had never evolved. that the troublesome species had never existed to disrupt galactic order. Then it encountered something that predated the universe itself. Dmitri was no longer bothering with his human disguise. Dr. Patel, watching through the cottage window, saw him expand, not physically but conceptually. He became larger than the garden, larger than Prague, larger than Earth, while somehow remaining the same elderly man who had been watering tomatoes minutes before. It was as if she was seeing him across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Omega beam struck the entity that mortals called death, and simply stopped. Not reflected, not absorbed, but incorporated. The weapon that was supposed to erase existence became part of the fundamental force that defined existence's boundaries. Inconvenient, Dmitri said mildly, his voice now echoing across interstellar space. I was enjoying being retired. What happened next broke several galactic council monitoring stations and caused 3 different species to revise their understanding of physics. Entirely, death began to manifest. It started with the local stellar neighborhood. Every star within 20 light-years began to flicker, not because they were dying, but because they were suddenly aware of their own eventual fate. They pulsed in harmony with the cosmic rhythm that governed all endings, their fusion hearts beating in time with something far more ancient than stellar physics. On the Omega device platform, senior technician Morden watched his instruments display readings that, translated roughly as mathematical impossibility, detected, and local reality has been politely asked to sit down and think about what it's done. The beam has been neutralized, he reported to High Counselor Velthara, his voice cracking. But not in any way our simulations predicted. It appears to have been welcomed by the target. In the council chambers, Velthara was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of their error. But pride, the fatal flaw of immortal beings who had forgotten that endings gave existence meaning, drove her to make one final catastrophic decision. Deploy all remaining fleet assets, she commanded. If we cannot erase them, we will overwhelm them with pure force. Every council warship, defensive platform, and weapons satellite in the galaxy received simultaneous activation orders. 2 million vessels began converging on Earth's solar system, carrying enough firepower to sterilize entire galactic arms. Dmitri felt their approach like a tsunami of aggression directed at his adopted home. His patience, already strained beyond the limits that had maintained his peaceful existence for 60 years, finally shattered completely. I tried to be polite, he said, and this time his voice carried the weight of every sunset, every final breath, every last page of every story ever told. But you refused to learn. The 4th manifestation began. Death revealed himself. Not as the skeletal figure of human mythology, not as any single cultural interpretation, but as the fundamental cosmic principle he actually was. He was the mathematical certainty that all things end. He was the force that prevented the universe from becoming static and meaningless. He was the gentle inevitability that gave weight to love, urgency to dreams, and preciousness to every moment of consciousness. Commander Vexhai, still trapped in Earth's gravity well with his enlightened crew, watched his instruments attempt to measure what they were seeing. It's not possible, he whispered. We're detecting a single entity whose mass appears to be approximately everything. Because that's what death was. Not separate from the universe, but the principle that defined its boundaries. Without endings, there could be no beginnings. Without conclusions, there could be no stories. Without mortality, there could be no meaning. The approaching Council Armada encountered him first as a simple impossibility. Their navigation systems couldn't plot courses to Earth because the coordinates no longer existed in any meaningful sense. The planet was still there, still orbiting its star, but it had somehow become the center of something that existed beyond normal space-time. Ships that had traveled for decades to reach the battle found themselves moving away from their target no matter which direction they flew. Weapons designed to function across galactic distances simply refused to lock onto anything in the solar system. Communication with Fleet Command became impossible, as signals encountered something that existed outside the framework of information transfer. What is happening to our fleet? Velthara demanded. But her advisors could only stare at displays showing 2 million warships scattered across local space, their crews reporting that they appeared to be sailing through solid concepts rather than empty vacuum. On Earth, Dimitri's manifestation was reaching completion. Dr. Patel, protected by his affection for human perspectives, watched the revelation unfold. She saw him as he truly was, not destroyer, but the force that made creation possible by ensuring that everything had an ending that gave it shape and meaning. His garden became a nexus point where every ending that had ever been or ever could be existed simultaneously. She saw flowers blooming and wilting in eternal cycles, saw her own life story written in the movement of wind through leaves, saw the birth and death of galaxies reflected in morning dew. "This is what you represent," she whispered, understanding flooding through her consciousness. "Not destruction," Dimitri confirmed, his form now spanning dimensions that human language couldn't describe. Completion, conclusion, the final note that makes the symphony beautiful instead of just noise. The effect spread outward from Earth like a wave of cosmic understanding. Every conscious being within 100 light-years suddenly experienced true awareness of mortality, not as terror, but as the gift that made existence meaningful. They felt their own eventual endings not as threats, but as the periods at the end of sentences that gave their life stories grammar and structure. The Council's massive armada, filled with beings who had spent millennia avoiding thoughts of endings, suddenly understood what they had tried to destroy. They weren't attacking a troublesome species. They were making war against the fundamental force that prevented the universe from becoming a meaningless static state. Across the galaxy, the most advanced civilizations felt the revelation like an earthquake in their souls. The eternal collective, who had uploaded their consciousness to achieve immortality, suddenly realized why their existence felt empty, and began voluntarily choosing endings to give their stored memories weight. The crystalline hierarchies, who grew new bodies whenever their old ones wore out, started creating burial ceremonies to honor discarded forms. But the most profound change occurred among the humans themselves. Every person on Earth felt Dimitri's true nature wash over them like a warm tide. Instead of terror, they experienced deep peace. They were the species that had always understood this truth. That awareness of ending made every moment precious. That mortality was not a flaw to be corrected, but a gift that gave existence, meaning. Children stopped crying at funerals and started asking wise questions about why people were sad, when they should be celebrating completed stories. Artists found themselves creating works of stunning beauty that captured the bittersweet joy of temporary existence. Scientists made breakthrough discoveries about the nature of time and consciousness by understanding that everything meaningful must have boundaries. "We're not anomalous," Dr. Patel said, watching her species embrace cosmic truth with the same natural grace they had always shown in the face of endings. "We're the only ones who got it right." "Yes," Dimitri agreed, his manifestation beginning to stabilize around his chosen form. "And that is why I chose to live among you, to learn from you, to understand how consciousness could embrace ending rather than flee from it." High Counselor Velthara, alone in her chamber as her advisors fled the cosmic revelation spreading through galactic civilization, finally understood the scope of their mistake. They hadn't discovered a species that brought death. They had found the only species wise enough to live, alongside death himself in harmony. And they had declared war on both. The consequences were about to reshape the galaxy itself. Dr. Patel had spent her career studying the impossible, but watching reality bend around an elderly man watering tomatoes pushed even her flexible worldview to its limits. As Dimitri's patience cracked, the very air in his garden began to shimmer with energies that made her eyes water. "Inside," he repeated, and this time his voice carried harmonics that seemed to echo from the end of all things. "Please." She backed toward the cottage, watching his 7 cats arrange themselves in what she now recognized as ancient symbols. Mathematical representations of entropy, transition, and the heat death of the universe spelled out in perfectly positioned felines. In the Galactic Council chambers, emergency klaxons wailed as real-time telemetry from the fleet painted an increasingly terrifying picture. High Counselor Velthara watched displays showing her finest warships trapped in temporal anomalies, their crews broadcasting philosophical poetry instead of tactical reports. The consciousness purge failed completely, reported Intelligence Director Zakthi, his serpentine form coiled around data feeds streaming from the battle zone. If anything, the attempted purge has accelerated whatever influence the humans are exerting on our forces. "Impossible," Velthara snapped. "Deploy the Omega Protocol. Total sterilization of the entire system. A collective intake of breath echoed through the chamber. The Omega Protocol was the Council's ultimate weapon, a device that didn't just destroy matter and energy, but erased the very possibility that they had ever existed. It had been used only once before, to eliminate the Void Singers whose music had threatened to unweave reality itself. High Counselor, Ambassador Zekthorian ventured, perhaps we should consider that we may have misunderstood. Silence. Velthara's crystalline form pulsed with angry light. I will not have the Galactic Order threatened by primitives who traffic with death energy. Activate the Omega device immediately. In Prague, Dmitri felt the Council's decision ripple across space-time like a bell tolling in dimensions that existed beyond normal physics. The Omega Protocol was a serious escalation, a weapon designed to not just kill but to unmake. It would erase not just Earth and humanity, but the very concept that they had ever existed. His tomatoes were looking particularly healthy this evening, their red faces glowing in the strange light that was beginning to emanate from his skin. He had been so careful for 60 years, so cautious about revealing what he truly was, but some things simply could not be tolerated. The Council has decided to use an existence eraser, he called to Dr. Patel through the cottage window. I'm afraid this means I must abandon subtlety. The change began slowly. Dimitri's carefully maintained human appearance started to slip, revealing glimpses of what lay beneath. Not skeletal death as popular mythology suggested, but something far more profound. He was the mathematical certainty that all things end, the cosmic principle that gave meaning to existence by ensuring nothing lasted forever. Commander Vexhai, still trapped in Earth's outer gravity well with the rest of the fleet, watched his instruments register impossible readings as the Omega device powered up. But something else was happening. Space-time itself was beginning to respond to the weapon's activation in ways that defied every law of physics. Sir, his newly enlightened communications officer reported with wondering voice. We're detecting massive reality fluctuations from the planet's surface. Whatever force has been restraining our fleet, it's beginning to unveil itself. The first manifestation was subtle. Every star in Earth's night sky began to pulse in perfect rhythm, as if the entire universe was breathing in unison. Then came the song. It wasn't audible in any conventional sense, but every conscious being within 50 light-years felt it resonate in their minds. The song of endings, the melody that played when stars died and when lovers said goodbye and when children grew up, and when stories reached their final chapters. It was beautiful and terrible and absolutely certain. What is that? Velthara demanded as the song reached even the council chambers, making her crystalline form ring like a bell. Dr. Patel, watching from her window as Dimitri's garden became ground zero for cosmic revelation, finally understood what she was witnessing. You're not hiding anymore, she whispered. No, came his voice, now carrying the weight of every ending that had ever been or ever would be. I tried to remain Dmitri Volkov, retired professor, but they want to erase not just human lives, but the very fact that humans ever existed. That offends me. The second manifestation was less subtle. Every biological clock in the solar system, circadian rhythms, bacterial life cycles, stellar fusion rates, suddenly synchronized with the heartbeat of the entity that governed all endings. The sun's nuclear burning accelerated, then slowed, pulsing in rhythm with something far older than stellar physics. Aboard the Eternal Dominion, crew members watched in awe as their own life support systems began displaying countdowns that somehow showed not just remaining air and power, but remaining moments of meaning, remaining opportunities for growth, remaining chances to create beauty before their individual stories reached their conclusions. It's magnificent, breathed the weapons officer, tears of enlightenment streaming down her crystalline face. We can see how much time we have left, and it makes every second precious. But the Omega device was nearly charged, its impossible energies building toward the moment when it would reach back through time and space to ensure that Earth had never existed. The weapon operated on principles that transcended normal causality. It could unmake past events, erasing them from the timeline itself. Dmitri felt the weapon's approach like a headache across multiple dimensions. Existence erasure was particularly annoying because it attacked the fundamental structure of reality rather than just manipulating matter and energy. Dealing with it would require him to reveal capabilities he had kept carefully hidden for eons. "Dr. Patel," he called, his voice now accompanied by the sound of cosmic winds and the whispered prayers of the dying across a million worlds. "Would you mind very much if I borrowed your planet's internet for a moment?" Before she could answer, every connected device on Earth, smartphones, computers, satellites, smart refrigerators, suddenly began displaying the same message simultaneously. "Attention, Galactic Council. You have attacked Death himself. This was unwise. You have approximately 4 minutes to reconsider your choices before I stop being polite about this situation. Management." The message appeared in every language known to every species in the galaxy, including several that had been extinct for millions of years. It also appeared in mathematical formulae that directly conveyed meaning to consciousness, ensuring that even species without traditional language could understand the warning. High Counselor Velthara stared at the message appearing on every screen in her chamber. "Management." "High Counselor," Kazakthi reported with growing panic. "We're receiving similar messages from every monitoring station across the galaxy. Every technological device in Council space is displaying this warning. Our security protocols have been completely bypassed. How is that possible?" "It isn't. The message appears to be originating from the concept of information itself, rather than any technological source." The third manifestation was decidedly less subtle. Every cemetery on Earth, every place where humans had gathered to honor their dead, began to glow with soft light that was visible from orbit. The glow spread outward, connecting burial grounds across continents in a vast network that pulsed with the rhythm of remembered love. Dimitri was showing the Galactic Council exactly what they had chosen to erase. Not just a species, but the only civilization that had learned to make death sacred, beautiful, and meaningful. Humanity's monuments to endings were lighting up like beacons across their planet, a testament to the unique relationship between his cosmic purpose and their mortal understanding. 3 minutes, his voice announced across every communication channel in the galaxy, now carrying with it the certainty of physics laws and the weight of stellar collapse. "I would very much like to return to feeding my cats and reading Dostoevsky. Please do not make this more complicated than necessary." But aboard the Omega device platform, the weapon's charging sequence had reached critical phase. Whether from pride, fear, or simple inability to comprehend what they faced, the Galactic Council's ultimate weapon was about to fire. Dimitri looked at his tomatoes one last time, touched a flower that had bloomed in his garden that morning, and prepared to remind the universe why some entities should not be threatened. The fourth manifestation was going to be considerably less gentle than the first 3. Commander Vexhai of the Galactic Council's flagship Eternal Dominion had spent 3 centuries conquering primitive worlds. Nothing in his experience had prepared him for a target that made his reality anchor systems scream warnings about fundamental constant failure and existential paradox detected. "Report," he demanded, his forearms working frantically across command interfaces that were displaying impossible readings. "Sir, we're encountering unprecedented resistance," reported his navigation officer, her usually steady voice cracking. "Space-time appears to be thickening as we approach the third planet. Our quantum drives are fighting against something that reads like gravitational waves, but generated by mathematics rather than mass." On Prague's quiet street, Dimitri felt each ship like pressure behind his eyes. Maintaining his human disguise while an entire battle fleet pressed against his cosmic presence required delicate balance. He was trying very hard not to accidentally erase anything important. "You're holding back," Dr. Patel observed, watching him tend his garden while alien warships struggled overhead like flies in honey. "I like this life," Dimitri replied, carefully watering his tomatoes. "Dmitry Volkov has friends, routines, a library card. He volunteers at the animal shelter on Thursdays. It would be inconvenient to lose all that." A flash of coherent energy split the night sky as one of the alien vessels attempted to fire a planet-killing lance at Earth's surface. The beam struck something invisible 50,000 kilometers above the atmosphere and simply stopped, hanging in space like a frozen lightning bolt. "Sir," the weapons officer aboard Eternal Dominion reported with barely controlled panic, "our quantum disruption lance has been paused, not reflected, not absorbed. It's just stopped moving through time." Commander Vexhi's tactical display showed the energy beam suspended in space, its massive power output continuing but somehow unable to advance even a single meter toward its target. Impossible. Deploy the relativistic kinetic bombardment array. Nothing can stop accelerated matter. The fleet launched 6 tungsten rods, each massing 10,000 tons and accelerated to 90% of light speed. They should have reached Earth in 17 seconds, carrying enough energy to shatter continents. They never arrived. Dmitri paused in his watering, feeling the projectiles encounter his presence. With the gentlest possible touch, he adjusted their trajectory through space-time, sending them on courses that would eventually deposit them in the cold space between galaxies, billions of years in the future when their energy would finally dissipate harmlessly. You just made 6 relativistic projectiles disappear, Patel said, her voice mixing awe with scientific fascination. Relocated, Dmitri corrected. Energy cannot be destroyed, only redirected. I sent them when they could do no harm. Mrs. Novikova from next door appeared at her fence, looking confused. Dmitri, why are there strange lights in the sky? And why do they keep making that horrible noise? The noise was the combined emergency broadcasts of 200 alien warships, their crews reporting impossible phenomena to an increasingly frantic Galactic Council. But to human ears, filtered through universal translators, it sounded like electronic music with very poor rhythm. Probably meteor shower, Mrs. Novikova. Dmitri replied kindly. Very beautiful, yes? She squinted at the sky where energy beams were frozen in space, and alien ships were trapped in temporal loops. If you say so, dear. Don't stay up too late. After she went inside, Patel stared at Dmitri. She can't see what's really happening. Human perception filters out information that doesn't fit established patterns. It's one of your species' most endearing survival traits. Mrs. Novikova sees lights and strange sounds. Her mind categorizes this as unusual but not threatening and moves on. Above them, Commander Vexhi was making increasingly desperate decisions. Deploy the consciousness disruptors. If we cannot destroy their planet, we'll erase their capacity for self-awareness. The new weapons were more insidious. Exotic particles designed to unweave the quantum threads that held minds together. They had been used to pacify 17 different rebellious species, reducing entire populations to docile vegetables within hours. Dmitri felt the weapons activate and sighed deeply. Now they've crossed a line. The consciousness disruptors swept toward Earth like an invisible tide of endings. But as they encountered Dmitri's presence, something unexpected happened. Instead of continuing toward their target, they began to resonate with him, amplifying rather than disrupting awareness. Every human on Earth suddenly experienced a moment of perfect clarity about mortality. Not terror, not despair, but profound understanding of their place in the cosmic cycle. Artists found themselves creating masterpieces in minutes. Philosophers solved questions that had puzzled them for decades. Children who had never considered death suddenly understood why their grandparents' stories were so precious. What did you do? Patel asked, feeling the wave of cosmic awareness wash over her own mind. I turned their weapon into a gift, Dmitri said simply. They wanted to erase consciousness. Instead, I gave humanity deeper understanding of why consciousness matters. The effect rippled outward from Earth, carrying with it something the Galactic Council had never encountered: human perspective on mortality. The weapon's exotic particles, transformed by contact with death himself, spread across local space, carrying the essence of humanity's beautiful relationship with endings. Commander Vexhi watched his instruments in growing horror as the consciousness disruptors reached his own fleet, but instead of shutting down enemy minds, they were enlightening his crews. Suddenly, every alien aboard every ship was experiencing existence through human eyes, understanding for the first time why mortality made life precious instead of terrifying. His weapons officer, a crystalline being who had lived for 8,000 years, suddenly began weeping with joy as she understood why her immortal existence had felt so empty. Commander, she whispered, we've been wrong about everything. The Vraxian navigator, whose species had developed elaborate rituals to avoid thinking about death, found himself composing what humans would recognize as poetry about the beauty of endings. The Tectorine engineer, bred in artificial wombs and modified to live indefinitely, experienced for the first time the sharp sweetness that came from knowing his existence was finite and therefore precious. Sir, his communications officer reported with newfound wonder in his voice. We're receiving a transmission from the planet's surface. It's beautiful. On Earth, every radio telescope and communication array had spontaneously begun broadcasting the same message, not in words, but in mathematical harmonies that conveyed concepts directly to consciousness. The message was simple and profound. You are welcome here. Learn what we have learned. Death is not the enemy of life. It is life's greatest teacher. Commander Vexhai, feeling mortality awareness seep into his centuries-old mind, finally understood what they had actually attacked. Fleet Command, he transmitted with a voice full of new humility. We need to withdraw immediately. We haven't encountered a hostile species. We've declared war on a fundamental force of the universe. But from the Galactic Council chambers, High Counselor Velthara's response was swift and merciless. Commander, your crews have been compromised by human influence. All ships are now classified as infected. Initiate fleet-wide consciousness purge and continue the mission. The purge systems activated across every ship, designed to strip away the new awareness and return the crews to their previous state of death denial. But the consciousness disruptors had been transformed by contact with something far older and more powerful than Galactic Council technology. Dmitri felt the purge attempt like someone trying to erase poetry from the universe itself. His patience, carefully maintained for 60 years of quiet human life, finally cracked. The cats in his garden stood up in perfect unison, their eyes now blazing with stellar fire. Dr. Patel, he said quietly, you might want to step inside. I believe I'm about to stop being quite so careful about maintaining my disguise. The real power of death was about to be revealed, and the Galactic Council was about to learn why every mythology in the universe treats such entities with reverence rather than weapons. Dr. Ishani Patel arrived in Prague 18 hours later, carrying 3 encrypted data drives and an expression that suggested she hadn't slept since their phone conversation. Dmitri Volkov met her at the airport, an elderly man in a worn wool coat who somehow managed to spot her instantly among thousands of travelers. You look exactly like your faculty photo from 2019, she said, studying his face. Haven't aged a day. Good genetics, and he replied with a slight smile, taking her largest suitcase. And Czech beer. Very preservative. They rode the metro in comfortable silence until Patel finally spoke. The mortality data makes no sense. It's not disease, not environmental factors, not even psychological stress. People just die. Natural causes, but the timing creates patterns that shouldn't exist. Show me, said Dmitri, and something in his voice made her look at him more carefully. His eyes were gray but seemed to shift depth like looking into still water. At his cottage, surrounded by cats and the smell of growing herbs, Patel spread printouts across his kitchen table. Star charts, statistical analyses, population surveys spanning decades. Here, she pointed to a cluster of red marks. The Kepler 442 system. Humans established mining operations in 2387. Within 6 months, the neighboring Vraxian system reported a 30% increase in deaths, not infant mortality, not elderly populations, random distribution across all age groups. Dmitri studied the data while preparing tea. His movements were precise, economical, like someone who had performed these actions countless times across countless years. And the Vraxians' explanation? They blame us. Say humans carry death energy like a virus. Other species are starting to believe it. Patel accepted the steaming cup, inhaling the complex blend of herbs she couldn't identify. The Galactic Council voted yesterday to resolve the problem permanently. Resolution how? Complete elimination of human space presence. Starting with Earth, Dmitri set down his cup with infinite care. When? Their advanced scouts entered our solar system 40 minutes ago. Main battle fleet arrives in 18 hours. Neither of them noticed how every cat in the house had gone completely still, their eyes reflecting starlight that wasn't coming through any window. Dmitri walked to his back garden where twilight was settling over Prague like a familiar blanket. Dr. Patel, what do you know about the personification of death in human mythology? She followed him outside, data drive still clutched in her hand. It's universal across cultures. Grim Reaper, Anubis, Hades, McClintock-Cutley. Why? Every civilization creates these figures because they sense something fundamental about existence. Death is not just biological cessation. It is the force that gives life meaning, urgency, beauty. Without death, there would be no evolution, no growth, no change, just eternal stagnation. A sound like distant thunder rolled across the clear sky. Both of them looked up to see lights moving between the stars, too organized to be natural phenomena. "The scouts," Patel whispered. The lights suddenly veered off course, tumbling through space in trajectories that violated several laws of physics. Emergency transmissions flooded Earth's monitoring stations in alien languages. But the universal translators carried one word clearly: impossible. Dmitri watched the alien ship struggle against forces they couldn't understand. He had done nothing overtly hostile, merely allowed his true nature to flex slightly. The Scouts' navigation systems were failing because they were trying to approach an entity whose very existence warped the fundamental constants they relied upon. "That's not normal," Patel said, but her scientific training was warring with growing certainty that nothing about this situation was normal. "Dr. Patel," Dmitri said gently, "have you ever wondered why humans developed such elaborate mythologies around death? Why every culture, no matter how isolated, creates stories about entities that govern the transition from life to whatever comes after?" She stared at him, pieces clicking together in ways that made her hands shake. "You're suggesting these mythologies are accurate?" "I'm suggesting that sometimes the old stories contain more truth than modern minds want to accept." He turned to face her fully, and for just a moment, she saw something vast and ancient looking out through his gray eyes. "What would you do if you discovered that one of those mythological figures had been living quietly in Prague for 60 years, feeding stray cats and growing tomatoes?" The alien ships overhead were now broadcasting continuous distress signals. Their crews were reporting impossible readings, space-time distortions that suggested they were simultaneously approaching their target and moving away from it, gravity wells that existed without mass, and energy signatures that their instruments translated as the mathematical concept of ending. "The mortality increases around human colonies," Patel said slowly. "It's not because humans bring death. It's because I find your species fascinating," Dmitri confirmed. "Humans have the most beautiful relationship with mortality I've encountered in 40 billion years of existence. You don't just accept death. You use awareness of it to create art, meaning love that burns brighter because you know it's temporary. So I linger near human spaces more than anywhere else in the universe." "Your death," she said. It wasn't a question. "Among other names, yes. Your Slavic ancestors called my current incarnation Baba Yaga," which seemed appropriately ambiguous for someone trying to live quietly among mortals. Above them, one of the alien scout ships had given up on approaching Earth entirely and was attempting to flee the solar system. Its engines fired at maximum burn, but the ship remained perfectly stationary relative to the sun, trapped in the gravitational influence of something that shouldn't exist. Patel's scientific mind was reeling, but her human intuition was oddly calm. "You've been living as a retired literature professor. I've been learning from the only species that truly understands what I represent. Do you know what every other civilization does when they achieve interstellar travel? They develop life extension technologies, upload consciousness to artificial systems, anything to avoid acknowledging that existence has limits. They create sterile immortalities that rob life of all meaning. But humans write poetry about autumn leaves. You create music that captures the bittersweet beauty of endings. You love more fiercely because you know time is limited. You are the first species I've encountered that makes death sacred, rather than something to be conquered." The main battle fleet was now entering the outer solar system, their massive dreadnoughts designed to sterilize entire planets. But as they approached, their crews began reporting the same impossible phenomena that had trapped the scouts. More concerning, their life support systems were beginning to malfunction in ways that suggested the very concept of alive was becoming unstable in local space. "They don't know what they're attacking," Patel realized. "No," Dmitri agreed, and now his voice carried harmonics that seemed to come from very far away. "They think they're eliminating a problematic species. They have no idea they've declared war on the fundamental force that governs the universe." His cats had arranged themselves in a perfect circle around the garden, their eyes now glowing with light that definitely wasn't reflecting from any earthly source. "What happens now?" Patel asked. Dmitri Volkov, who was also Baba Yaga, who was also the cosmic principle of ending and transition, looked at the alien fleet struggling against forces beyond their comprehension. "Now they learn why humans tell such interesting stories about death," he said quietly, "and we discover whether the Galactic Council is wise enough to apologize to something that has existed since the first star died." The largest dreadnought's engines had just gone completely silent, its crew reporting that they appeared to be sinking into empty space as if it were thick water. The real war was about to begin. The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian, its curved walls displaying the real-time status of 14 trillion souls across 47 star systems. Ambassador Zekthorian adjusted his breathing apparatus as he reviewed the proposal that had kept the council in session for 6 rotations straight. "The motion stands before us," announced High Counselor Velthera, her crystalline voice echoing through universal translators. "Complete elimination of the human threat before their influence spreads beyond their singular system." Murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates. The humans had only achieved faster-than-light travel 3 standard cycles ago, yet their impact on galactic order had been unprecedented. Not through military might or technological superiority, but through something far more disturbing. Ambassador Kroon of the Tectorine Empire leaned forward, his 6 eyes blinking in sequence. "The data is irrefutable. Wherever humans establish contact, mortality rates among our populations increase by factors we cannot explain. Their very presence seems to accelerate the natural death cycle of all sentient beings." "It's not natural death," corrected Dr. Ishani Patel's translation matrix, broadcasting from Earth's diplomatic frequency. The human woman's image flickered in the chamber's center, her dark hair framing a face that somehow made several species deeply uncomfortable. "You're measuring correlation, not causation. Our medical advances have actually extended lifespans in every system we've—" "Silence the primitive," Velthera commanded, cutting the transmission. "We have observed the pattern. Human colonies report normal statistics, but surrounding systems experience what they euphemistically call death waves. Their explanation of coincidence insults our intelligence. What the Council couldn't know, was that among the 8 billion humans on Earth, one individual had been listening to every word of their debate through means that had nothing to do with technology. In a small cottage outside Prague, a man who appeared to be in his 70s sat in a wooden chair, feeding breadcrumbs to sparrows outside his window. His neighbors knew him as Dmitry Volkov, a retired literature professor who lived alone with too many cats and kept an immaculate garden. They had no idea that Dmitry was merely the current name worn by an entity older than galaxies, older than the concept of time itself, the entity that mortals across countless worlds had tried to name. Death? Thanatos Azrael Mors the Grim Reaper, and in this particular incarnation, drawing from Slavic folklore that felt comfortably familiar, Baba Yaga. He felt the Council's decision crystallize across space like a bell tolling in a cathedral. They had voted. The human species would be neutralized before their death-bringing influence could contaminate more systems. The irony was so profound it almost made him smile. Almost Baba Yaga had chosen to embed himself among humans precisely because they were the first species in eons to truly understand death. Not as an ending, but as a transition. Not as punishment, but as completion. Their artists wrote about it. Their philosophers pondered it. Their scientists studied it. And their ordinary citizens faced it with a mixture of fear and acceptance that created the most beautiful symphonies of existence he had ever witnessed. Other species fled from death, built elaborate technologies to avoid it, created religions that promised to escape it. Humans decorated graves with flowers, told stories about their deceased, and somehow made peace with the inevitable in ways that enriched rather than diminished their lives. It was why mortality rates increased around human colonies, not because humans brought death, but because Baba Yaga, fascinated by humanity's unique relationship with his domain, lingered in their vicinity more than anywhere else in the universe. His presence, even disguised and dampened, had effects that rippled through local space-time. Now the Galactic Council, in their infinite wisdom, had decided to attack Death himself. The first ships would arrive within 72 Earth hours. Baba Yaga finished feeding the sparrows and went inside to water his tomatoes. The afternoon sun slanted through his kitchen window, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny souls in the light. He had been playing at being human for nearly 60 years now, long enough to develop genuine affection for this identity he wore. Dmitry Volkov had published papers on Tolstoy, had attended his neighbor's daughter's wedding, had mourned when Mrs. Novakova's husband passed last winter. He had built a life here, complete with routines and relationships and small joys that had nothing to do with his cosmic purpose. The cats, 7 of them, all strays he had taken in, sensed his mood shift. They gathered around his feet with unusual attentiveness, their eyes reflecting depths that would have unsettled anyone who noticed. But humans wonderfully saw only cats. He considered his options. He could shed this disguise, reveal his true nature, and deal with the approaching threat in the traditional manner. The council would learn exactly what they had decided to attack, but the lesson would likely sterilize several star systems in the process. Billions would die, and not in the natural, meaningful way that gave existence its weight and beauty. Or he could remain Dmitry Volkov, retired professor, cat enthusiast, and neighbor to 800,000 completely unaware residents of Prague, and see what happened when cosmic powers collided with human stubbornness. His phone rang. The ringtone was Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, a human composition that somehow captured the majesty of universal cycles in mere notes and rhythm. The caller ID showed Dr. Patel, the same woman who had been addressing the council. Dmitry, I know this sounds crazy, but I need your help. Something's happening that I can't explain through normal channels. Baba Yaga answered in accented English, maintaining the character he had built. Dr. Patel, it is late evening here. What assistance could an old professor possibly provide? You published that paper on death imagery and Slavic folklore, right? The one about how different cultures personify the end of life? I need to understand something about old stories, about what happens when people mistake metaphor for literal truth. Through the phone, he could hear the tension in her voice, the weight of knowledge that was pulling her toward conclusions her scientific training said were impossible. Come to Prague, he said quietly. Some conversations require tea and proper chairs. And Dr. Patel, bring whatever data you have about the galactic mortality patterns, all of it. After hanging up, Baba Yaga looked out at his garden where evening shadows were beginning to lengthen. The approaching ships would arrive with weapons designed to eliminate what they thought was a species-wide anomaly. They had no idea they were about to attack the fundamental force that gave meaning to existence itself. This was going to be interesting.